When Shay came over after work, the first words out of her mouth were, "Where'd you get that sweater?" "This old thing?" Olivia tugged at it. "I've had it for a long time." Shay replied with suspicion, "I've never seen it before." "I don't know what to tell you. I found it in the closet, washed it up. It's a men's shirt." "How can you tell?" "Buttons are on the men's side." Olivia didn't know buttons took sides, but she said, "So what? You wear men's clothes all the time." "Yeah, but you don't." Shay gave her a serious look and said, "That's Mr. Davies' sweater, isn't it?" "No," Olivia sputtered. "I thought you were going to throw it out. I thought it was full of moths." How long did she plan to keep up this charade? Shay could obviously see right through it. Olivia said, "I washed it. I got all the moths out. I boiled it, I froze it, I ran it through the washer and dryer. The moths are gone." "That's not the point," Shay said, holding her head like it was about to fall off her shoulders. "Why are you keeping something that belonged to him?" Olivia played it cool. "Look how much it shrunk. It fits me perfectly." "That's not what I'm talking about, and you know it." "Yeah, I know what you're talking about, and I don't want to talk about it because you're wrong, and you refuse to admit it, and it's really annoying." "Oh, it's annoying, is it?" Shay asked. "It's annoying that you have your head buried so deep in the sand that you won't even let yourself see that he took advantage of you, even now that he's dead. That's annoying, is it?" "Yes, it's annoying when someone tells you you're in denial, but you aren't." Shay backed away, jolting like she'd been shot. Actually, her skin was even a different color. Green, almost. She didn't look okay. When she was up against the door, she said, "Look, I'm sorry, Livy, but you know my history. You know my trauma. I can't be having this conversation. I'm sorry for your loss, and I really want to be there for you, but it's forcing me to relive way too much, and I really can't handle it right now." Why did Shay always have to make everything about herself and her trauma? Couldn't anything just be about Olivia and what she was going through? "You can't handle it? I'm the one whose first love just died. How do you think I feel?" Shay looked her plain in the face, muttering the words, "first love," over and over again. Finally, she shook her head and said, "I don't have the slightest clue how you feel." "That's right," Olivia replied, maybe a bit too aggressively. "I'm sorry, Livy, I need to go." And she left, just like that. Slipped out the door, gone. Olivia didn't see any more moths after Shay left. They must have been living in that bag she'd tossed down the garbage chute. She didn't want to think about anything Shay had said. She didn't want to think about Mr. Davies. But she still went to his funeral the next day. Sort of. She took the bus to the funeral home. She even went inside. There was a nice lady greeting people at the door. Not Mrs. Davies, just a lady who worked at the funeral place. The lady asked, "Davies or Chung?" "Huh?" Olivia glanced past the woman. She could see a bunch of people milling around down the hall. Wow, a lot of people came to his funeral. And some of them looked really familiar. Was that... Yes, it was. Ms. O'Connor. Her grade 11 chemistry teacher. Ms. O'Connor was talking to Mr. Yip, who'd never taught her, but if she recognized him, he'd probably recognize her. "Are you all right?" the nice lady asked. Olivia didn't answer. She heard the door open behind her, and she glanced back, scared that it would be another one of her high school teachers. It wasn't, thank goodness. She couldn't face them. She knew that, for sure. She couldn't make small talk and act as if Mr. Davies had only been a teacher to her. He'd been so much more. The people who'd come in the door said they were there for the Chung funeral. Olivia mumbled, "Yeah, me too," and followed them into the chapel of rest, laid out with lots of white flowers. She took the lucky money envelope handed to her and clutched it against her chest as she took a seat. Pretty much the entire funeral was done in Chinese. She pretended to understand. She looked like she should. It's not as if she didn't fit in. In some ways, she fit in better here than she would down the hall. Anyway, she'd rather sit in on a funeral she didn't understand than face a room full of her old high school teachers and Mr. Davies' wife and his children. She'd convinced herself the one thing that would give her closure would be seeing Mr. Davies in a casket. So what did it say about her that she was passing up this one opportunity? She wouldn't get another. In a couple of hours, he'd be in the ground. And then what? No closure, ever? Maybe she didn't want closure. Maybe she didn't want to let him go. As the Chung funeral continued, Olivia looked down at her outfit. She'd worn black stockings and shoes, a black skirt, black turtleneck, and over that, Mr. Davies' sweater. The blue looked gray and dusty against so much black. She hadn't worn a coat, even though the weather was chilly enough to warrant one. And why fail to wear a coat? Maybe because she'd planned to turn every head when she walked into Mr. Davies' funeral. All those teachers would vaguely remember that this was his sweater. His wife and kids would recognize it for sure. They'd see her wearing his clothes, and they'd know what that meant. They'd know what she'd meant to him. The Chung funeral was really long. After she left, she worked up the courage to poke her head in on Mr. Davies. But it was over too. She might have guessed. All the people were gone. The casket was gone. Some floral arrangements remained. The nice lady who worked there was picking up programs and used tissues off the floor. She had her back to Olivia, and she jumped when Olivia said, "That's so gross." The nice lady swiveled around to look at her. She seemed more frightened than she ought to be. Maybe they got a lot of ghosts at the funeral home. That would make sense. If you were a ghost and you saw your own funeral going on, that would be really trippy. Especially if there were things you wanted everyone to know about your life, but the people giving the speeches were just talking about stupid things you didn't care about. "What's gross?" the nice lady asked gently. She had a blue glove on one hand, like the kind they use at hospitals, and in the other hand she was holding a small garbage pail. It's gross that people throw their snotty tissues on the floor for someone else to pick up. It's disgusting. These are educated people. They know better. But sometimes people who know better think they are better. They think they can do whatever they want, even if it affects someone else's life. People are so stupid and gross and disgusting. Olivia just wanted the nice lady to agree with her, that's all. But instead she said, "When we're grieving, we sometimes act in ways we otherwise wouldn't." That's not what Olivia wanted to hear. She turned on her heels and left the funeral room, rushed past the crowd of Chung mourners, and skittered down the front steps. It was raining now. Of course it was. Rainy days were made for funerals. Except the bus stop she had to wait at didn't have a shelter, and she hadn't brought an umbrella. The bus took forever. By the time she got on, she was soaked to the bone. For some reason, the driver had turned on the air conditioning. She sat at the back, hugging herself, shivering. Her teeth were chattering, too. To warm up, she tried rocking side to side. It didn't work, but no one sat near her. She wished someone would, someone with a lot of body heat, someone like Shay, someone who would wrap both arms around her and tell her this wasn't the end of the world. April showers bring May flowers, that sort of thing. When she got home, she hoped Shay would be there. It was early, but there was always a chance Shay might pop over for lunch. No, that was unlikely. Shay supervised the weight room during her lunch hour. She was a devoted teacher, Shay. Spent so much of her spare time with those girls, those high school girls, young athletes, sprinters, swimmers, students in uniform. Did Shay look at them the way Mr. Davies had looked at her, at Olivia, when she was that age? Olivia got a sick feeling in her stomach. She kicked off her mushy shoes and padded into the kitchen, leaving wet footprints across the floor. Felt nice and toasty warm in here, but she'd have to get out of these wet clothes just as soon as she'd eaten some crackers. She hadn't had breakfast, had she? Or lunch. She'd been too nervous about the funeral. Hadn't she heard somewhere that you could dry your clothes in the oven? Yes, that sounded right if you set it to a very low temperature. So that's what she did. She let it preheat while she made her way to the bathroom. Stripped off her wet clothes. They didn't want to come off, particularly the stockings. She should probably take a hot bath. But first, she'd have to supervise her clothes. She didn't want to put them in the oven and then walk away. After all the effort she'd put into salvaging Mr. Davies' sweater, the last thing she wanted was to burn it to cinders. Olivia unhooked her robe from the bathroom door and wrapped it around her shoulders. That was better, cuddly warm, just the feeling she'd been hoping for all the way home. Should she put the clothes on a baking sheet? Sure, why not? She laid out the garments neatly on the metal tray and then slid it into the oven. Oh, that was nice and warm. Dry heat. She pulled the step stool close and sat on the bottom rung with the oven door open. This was probably terrible for the environment, but she was just so cold. Cold to her bones. The only problem was her feet. They were still freezing. She'd have to duck into the bedroom to grab a pair of socks from the dresser. It would only take 5 seconds, 10 at the most. Nothing could burn that fast. Closing the oven door, Olivia got up from the step stool. As she crossed the kitchen, she avoided the wet footprint splotches all across the floor. Didn't want to fall and break her neck. She took her time getting to the bedroom, even though she was in a rush. For some reason, she felt really anxious about going inside. And when she stood facing the dresser, she knew why. Above the vanity mirror, there was a moth on the wall. No, she was wrong. Not one moth, but two. No, three. 3 moths. Shouldn't bother her so much, but they did. They did because she'd never seen moths on this particular wall. The other 3, yes, but not this one. And more than that, she'd convinced herself they were gone. She'd done everything in her power to kill them. She'd boiled and washed and frozen Mr. Davies' sweater. She'd thrown Mrs. Davies' old bag down the garbage chute. She'd sprayed the entire place with lavender. What more could she do? She felt disheartened. That's what it was. She'd done all she could, and the moths were still there. But only 3 of them. She could kill 3 with her bare hands. Shay would tell her to grab the step stool, but she wouldn't be able to reach the wall, not with the dresser in the way. It would be easier to climb the dresser itself. That's what she'd have to do. She pulled out the bottom drawer and the middle one, making them into stairs. Wobbly stairs. When she placed one foot on the first drawer, the mirror shuddered. This was a bad idea, but she only had to get to the top of the dresser. Once she was standing on it, the whole thing would be stable. It was a sturdy piece of furniture. It could support her just fine. Grabbing the top of the dresser, Olivia pulled herself up. She raised her left foot off the floor and planted it on the second drawer. Just when she thought she might get away with it, the dresser started to tip. She knew it would be better to jump down, but instead, she leaned her weight forward, trying to create a counterbalance effect. Her mind worked faster than time itself. Even as she tried to heave herself up on the dresser, she knew it wouldn't happen. She had this horrible feeling, sicker than sick, like a knot in her guts. It just got tighter the more she struggled. When the dresser tipped, so did the vanity mirror. It swung on such an angle, Olivia could no longer see her own reflection. As she fell backward, time stood still. It stood still for just a moment, just long enough for her to see what the mirror wanted to show her. At the top of the wall, right above the closet, an army of moths lined up, single file. Same thing on the wall with the desk pushed against it. Moths as far as the eye could see. Waiting, calm as anything. Waiting for their time to come. Shay picked up a bouquet of tulips on her way to Olivia's place. Whether or not Olivia had gone to Mr. Davies' funeral, it was bound to be a rough evening. Olivia could keep the flowers if she wanted them, or, alternately, Shay was prepared to drive her to the cemetery. That way she could lay them on his grave without prying eyes watching. When she got off the elevator, something smelled funny. Burning, but not food. It only got stronger as she approached Olivia's door. The second she set foot inside, she knew there was something in the oven that shouldn't be. She took a hard left. Tossing the tulips on the counter, she opened Olivia's oven. "What were you thinking?" Shay called out, turning the dial to off. "Are these clothes in here? They're burnt to a crisp." Olivia didn't respond. She must have put this stuff in the oven, gone out, and forgotten all about it. Such a Livy move. She was probably the most forgetful person Shay had ever met. Grabbing a tea towel, Shay yanked the baking sheet from the oven and tossed it on the stove. What on earth was this girl thinking? Who puts clothes in the oven? The smoke detector chose that moment to start blaring. Fortunately, Olivia set it off so often Shay was a bit of an expert at shutting it off. She grabbed the step stool and set it up in the hallway, climbed up, pressed the button to deactivate it temporarily. She was about to return the stool to the kitchen when something caught her eye. A flutter by the bedroom. "Moths," she said to herself as she headed that way. "You'll never be rid of those things." When she arrived at the open door, her heart stopped. Her feet froze. She tried to move, but nothing happened. Tried to cry out, but no sound emerged. At first, she wasn't entirely sure what she was seeing. It took a moment for her vision to focus. That's when she realized she was looking at Olivia on the floor with a dresser crushing her legs and a mirror covering part of her torso. In her mind, Shay was telling herself to go to her girlfriend, perform CPR or something. She had all that training, but in the pit of her stomach, she knew Olivia was no more. Her neck had obviously snapped. You couldn't be alive when your head was facing the wrong direction. The worst was her open eyes, or maybe her parted lips. She didn't look like she was sleeping. She looked dead. But if she was dead, how could her chest be moving like that? Palpitating, trembling. Her heart must still be beating under that silky beige sweater. Olivia had been right when she'd said Shay hadn't seen every item of clothing she owned. Shay had never seen this one before. Strange, the way it seemed to be moving. Her eyes must be playing tricks on her. "Livy," Shay called out. She fought against her motionless muscles, struggling forward, tripping over her own frozen feet. This was her own personal hell, seeing her girlfriend in need of help and not being able to offer it. She slid across the bedroom floor, dragged her body closer. Should she lift the dresser first or slap Olivia's cheek? She knew she couldn't lift in this sorry state, so she opted for the slap, but chickened out at the last second. She couldn't hit her girlfriend, not even to shock the life back into her. Instead, she reached for Olivia's shoulder and shook it. The girl was dead weight. Her head jostled slightly, but she didn't even acknowledge Shay. Her eyes remained open. So did her mouth. She didn't respond even as Shay shouted, "Livy? Livy, say something, please. Tell me you're with me." As Shay pleaded with the body, she felt a strange tickle against her skin. Her instinct was to believe those were Olivia's fingertips on the back of her hand. But no, it wasn't fingertips. Not fingertips. Moths. They scattered, but not as much as Shay would have thought. They seemed to be coming at her rather than flying away from her, landing in her hair, landing on her jacket, crawling up her sleeves. But where were they coming from? That silky beige sweater Olivia had on, the one Shay had never seen before, the one that seemed to be moving. When she looked closely, she realized Olivia's silky beige sweater was moving. That thing was made of moths.